I've been a subscriber for several months now, like most of this year, and so I've been able to watch your shows, and of course, Pastor Jimmy and Pastor Mark, and it's been very, very helpful and instructive and just a blessing. And so I'm very grateful for what you do and what Jimmy and Mark do as well. So thank you.
Reporting from Jerusalem for EndTimes.com, this is Brian Schrauger. This week's report is a special treat. First, one item of news. Since last week's report, Israel has continued to secure itself from the military assets of Bashar Assad's Syrian regime. It has taken out chemical weapons, missiles, rockets, launch systems, military bases, intelligence sites, naval assets, and more. Jerusalem is also securing its border with Syria, including the placement of IDF troops in a buffer zone. Established by the United Nations in the aftermath of Israel's 1973 Yom Kippur War, the zone is about 50 miles long and 3 to 6 miles wide, for a total of about 146 square miles. To this day, it's called the UNDOF zone. UNDOF is an acronym that stands for United Nations Disengagement Observer Force. The move by Israel to place troops in that zone has been met with condemnation by the UN, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and more. All of them accuse the Jewish state of invasion and opportunistic expansionism. Are those accusations true? Why is Israel there? IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, gives an explanation from that zone inside Syria. Please note that I have burned English subtitles onto this clip.
אנחנו כאן כמעט שבוע. הסיבה המרכזית, ביטחון המדינה. אנחנו כאן כדי להגן לאורך הגבול ברמת הגולן, צפון רמת הגולן, חרמון. הייתה פה מדינה שהיא מדינת אויב, צבא שלה קרס, יש איום שיגיעו לפה גורמי טרור, ואנחנו יצאנו קדימה כדי שגורמי טרור לא יתיישבו, גורמי טרור קיצוניים, לא יתיישבו לנו צמוד לגבול. אנחנו לא מתערבים במה שקורה בסוריה, אין לנו כוונה לנהל את סוריה, אנחנו מתערבים חד משמעית במה שקובע את ביטחון אזרחי ישראל פה מאחורה ביישובים ברמת הגולן. ואת זה אנחנו עושים מקצועי ואנחנו עושים נכון, אנחנו עושים גם בנחישות. ההיערכות, לדעתי, לאורך כל הגבול, מהחרמון עד מפגש הגבולות ישראל, סוריה, ירדן, היערכות נכונה, היערכות טובה. תקפידו גם לייצר הרבה מאוד שינויים. יש לכם כאן את כל הסיוע הצה"לי הנדרש. יש פה סד"כ מעולה, גם אנשי מילואים, גם סדיר, גם חטיבות סדירות, גם יחידות מיוחדות. סיוע מטכ"לי מכל הכיוונים, תפעילו את הכל בתבונה.
In short, having learned a hard lesson from Hezbollah in Jordan, Israel is in that zone in order to prevent new terror forces from setting up on Israel's border, this time with Syria. The rest of this report, as I said, is a special treat. Last week, Tipping Point subscriber Stefan Byrne posted a comment in response to news about the overthrow of Bashar Assad in Syria. I was immediately intrigued. Stefan is one of very few U.S. soldiers who served in Syria during the time when ISIS was threatening the entire Middle East. Working with Kurdish forces there, the U.S. was providing those troops with intelligence and military advice. It was also interceding with the likes of Turkey and other factions in northern Syria who sometimes clashed with those U.S. Kurdish allies. Stefan was one of those U.S. soldiers serving in Syria. With the rank of sergeant, he was a linguist, facilitating communication with allies who did not speak English. When I saw his comment last week, a number of questions exploded in my mind. What was it like in Syria? How did various groups there relate to Israel and the U.S.? Did he witness religious distinctives between various streams of Islam? What were his thoughts about the expulsion of Assad's regime and about the jihadist group that evicted him, HST, and its leader, Muhammad al-Julani? Also, as a believer, what kinds of things did he learn from the inside of an active war zone? It is one thing to look at Israel-related news from headlines and analyses at a bird's eye view. It's another thing entirely to see it from ground level. Join me as we hear Stefan Byrne's witness from his time at ground level in Syria.
Thank you, Stefan, for meeting up to do this today. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for asking me. I'm really honored, honestly. Thank you.
Well, I saw your comment on endtimes.com about a recent report stating that you were in Syria as a member of U.S. military. And it intrigued me because you were there in years that were pretty important to Syria and the Kurds. What is your story? What were you doing there?
I joined the Army when I was 18. By the time I deployed to Syria, I had been in for, I guess, about 7 years by that point. So initially, when I first came in, when I first joined, I was young, I was 18, I wanted to just blow stuff up and, do the Army thing, right? And so that was, kind of initially what I was doing. I was more on the combat arms side.
Right.
I deployed to Afghanistan doing that. So I had experience there.
Wow.
After doing that, after my first contract was coming up, come toward the end, I wanted to transition to a different specialty, something that I knew would be a little bit more helpful when I got out. And so I transitioned over to military intelligence and specifically as a linguist. And so I learned Arabic.
Wow.
Well, but to be completely honest, I was never fluent in conversational Arabic. I learned enough to be able to read and listen and understand some, not to do what we needed to do. The Army just sends you wherever. But we did, in fact, deploy to Syria, and of course, Arabic is really very widely spoken there. So that was kind of cool to be able to use it in an operational environment like that. It was spring of 2017. We found out that we were getting orders for deployment. So our brigade deployed to Kuwait, which is very common. And from Kuwait, different units will go out to wherever in the Middle East to support different missions. So we found out that my team specifically was going to be going to Syria. And that we would be supporting operations there. So to set the stage for what was going on at that time, this would have been fall of 2017 that we got there. There were about 2,000 U.S. forces in Syria itself at that time.
Right.
Main mission was supporting the Kurdish forces. They were doing all of the frontline fighting, at least in that area, against ISIS and ISIS primarily, some of the other extremist groups as well. Our intent was to help support them, but primarily as being a deterrent to Turkey. So technically, we are NATO allies with Turkey. Turkey, if you know the history, does not like the Kurdish people.
No, not at all.
So they definitely, and they have their own interests there in Syria. So they had actually already driven into northern Syria. They had a presence there. So of course that would have been a huge distraction to the Kurds, and it would have taken away their focus from fighting ISIS. They would have wanted to push back against Turkey. So being the United States military, we had, the ability to call them and say, stop what you're doing. Just let us get this fight done, basically.
Right.
So yeah, our whole presence there was basically to try and keep the peace, if you will, between Turkey, the Kurds, and then of course these Syrian militias. And it was a very odd situation just because of how many groups are there, all of the different things that were going on. Our initial concern was defeating ISIS, but we didn't want to commit full, U.S. troops on the ground directly fighting them. We were like, okay, we will help the locals fight and deal with this problem, we'll do airstrikes and those sorts of things, but we're not just going to deploy, full brigade combat teams to deal with this.
Where exactly were you in Syria?
So we were in northern Syria. We were right outside the city of Manbij, west of the Euphrates River. It wasn't too far from the Turkish border.
Right.
So yeah, that's where we were.
So you were there helping keep the peace and helping the Kurds, basically, who are our allies, U.S. allies,
Right.
in fighting ISIS.
Right.
How long were you there, and when did you leave?
So personally, I was there from the fall of 2017 until I think it was around March of 2018. That was right as I was transitioning out of active duty.
I think it was 2019 that Trump kind of told Erdogan, do what you want in terms of coming in and creating what he wanted to call a safe space or something like that for Turkey. What are your thoughts about that?
When I first heard about it, I do remember feeling frustration and some disappointment because it did feel like an abandonment of our Kurdish allies.
Yeah.
And looking back on it now, if we look at what happened after we left, removing our presence allowed for a lot of consequences that were very negative for the Kurdish people. And I don't have a ton of expertise on that, but I know there were human rights violations. There were Turkish-backed Syrian militias that did a lot of things that were not good, specifically to the Kurdish people. The Kurds were overseeing prisons that housed ISIS fighters. Some of those fighters apparently were able to escape, so there was fears of maybe an ISIS resurgence after that. So those sorts of things were happening. That being said, from a more geopolitical perspective, and thinking about, President Trump, his administration, and kind of the thoughts there, his goal was to end wars, right? It was to get us out of involvement in a lot of these foreign wars that were going on.
Right.
I'm disappointed with how it happened. Was the decision to remove us from Syria inherently wrong? Not necessarily, but the way it happened, like you said, it basically allowed Erdogan to just do what he wanted at that point. So that was unfortunate. Honestly, it's very similar to what happened when we left Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Again, was it wrong for us to leave Afghanistan? I mean, we had been there for 20 years. There's a lot of money and a lot of spent in that country, but the way we did it and what happened afterwards, I mean, it was, having deployed there as well, it almost felt like it was pointless. And I know people who died there. So looking at where Afghanistan is now and what the Taliban has done and all of that, I mean, it's almost like, what was the point? Like, why were we there, And I know that that's a very complicated question. And, there's a lot that goes into that. And so I'm not saying it was pointless or that we shouldn't have ever been involved or anything. I'm simply saying, just from a strictly personal perspective, when you're spending your life, you're putting your life on the line to go to Afghanistan or Syria or any of these places, you want there to be a positive impact from that. But decisions need to be made, at these high levels, and these things happen, and you have to recognize that that's part of being in this world, right? In the DoD and in the military, and that's part of it. So, yeah.
I could not help but think after HST and Mohammed al-Jilani stepped in and kicked out Bashar Assad, they've made all kinds of promises about what they're going to do, how they're going to behave. And it just reminded me of the Taliban coming back into Afghanistan saying, we're going to give rights to women. We're going to be good people. Well, they haven't really followed through with that. That what they said versus what they actually did were quite different things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think HST and al-Jilani are similar? Are we going to see them do what they're saying they're going to do, or do you think they're going to be act more in lines with their old Al-Qaeda roots?
Well, I will say that time will tell for sure.
I know it's a guess, right?
Right. I mean, you just said it. They have roots in Al-Qaeda. They have roots in Al-Nusra Front, which is another terrorist organization. They have roots in ISIS. There was a lot of different groups that kind of came together to form this militia, right? They're extremists, ultimately.
Jihadists, for sure.
Right. I think they're going to say a lot of things to try and present themselves as being moderate and, the good guys. And especially when... It's weird when you look at it, Assad and his regime, they were not good people. That was not he was a dictator. He did a lot of horrible things. So the Syrian people, thinking of them wanting to rise up and get rid of this guy. Oh yeah. I mean, especially coming from an American perspective where we're very much, freedom and
right,
just all of that. our roots are in our own revolution. So there's some sympathy there. And I think they're wanting to play off of that a little bit.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I mean, they are an extremist organization. They're still labeled as a terrorist group. Based on some of the reports I've seen, they're already doing things, cleansing and other things in certain areas, and they're killing people without a trial. I mean, they're doing a lot of those things. Just, they're already showing who they are. So I don't think we can really trust them to stay true to their word if they're saying, we're going to be more moderate and we're going to do these things. I doubt that.
Well, as you know, that's the main reason Israel has been bombing all of these weapons depots, military sites. They took out the entire Syrian Navy a couple of days ago. It's really amazing to me. This wasn't even a big news item, but
right.
Israel has decided that they're not going to just sit back and leave all these armaments and military capabilities with HST. It is interesting that for the most part, there have been some mild objections coming from spokesmen of this group, but for the most part, they've not been fussing too much about it, which I find intriguing. What I worry about is, what are they going to do with the Kurds? You said the Kurds were guarding or imprisoning a lot of ISIS people. That's still the case, is it not? I mean, they still have a lot of ISIS prisoners there. So if HST moves in, and are they going to let the Kurds remain? I mean, the Kurds would like to be a separate people up there.
Absolutely.
And are they going to allow that? I mean, I'm not asking you because I think but because it's just like, it's a concern, right?
Well, that's a really good point. So, for the sake of those that may not know, the Kurdish people are a distinct ethnic group, and they live in Syria and Turkey and Iraq, and
they're in Iran too.
And in Iran, right.
Yeah.
And this has happened with several different distinct groups there. There's a lot of history and how the map got written, all of that stuff. But the point being that really the Kurdish people should have had their own country. They don't mix well with the other people groups, the Syrian Arabs, the Turks, because they just don't like each other. And we can, wish that everyone would just get along. That's not how life works.
No.
So you have this group of people that's their own distinct culture, and they want, their own land. I think they were hoping that we would help in that endeavor. So when we left, they were very upset, because I think they were really hoping that, we would kind of return the favor for all the hard work they did fighting ISIS by pushing more for their own territory. I can't say that with any authority necessarily, but I think that's probably a lot of what was going on. All of that to say, there's a ton of tension between these Syrian militia groups, these terrorist organizations, and the Kurdish people. And of course, you add Turkey into that mix, and whatever is going on in Iraq as well, like you said, Iran. So it's very complicated, and I don't see these Syrian groups being okay with the Kurds just having this territory and governing there. Like, I could definitely see that turning into an issue soon. So we'll see what happens, but that would be my guess.
You are dealing with a lot of people in Afghanistan, I guess Kuwait for a while, but certainly in Syria as well, who are Muslims. And I think a lot of people don't realize all Muslims are not alike.
Right.
There's some very distinct groups and distinct emphases. What is your experience? What did you see dealing with these different Muslim groups?
So I will say, strictly from an operational perspective, we had a mission that we were performing both in Afghanistan and Syria. The specific problems between different sects of Islam and that kind of thing never really came up, at least not directly. I'm sure in the background some of that had an influence, but the thoughts of just the normal people there varied widely, like it does anywhere else. But a lot of them just simply didn't want us there. That wasn't necessarily because of a tension religiously. That was simply just socially or culturally. They didn't want us involved. And so you would end up having a lot of people that would join a militia or do something to fight against us. And they weren't religiously motivated. They just didn't want us in their land. So there were a lot of those situations. Now, was Islamic extremism a problem, and did it contribute to, a lot of problems, both, when we were in Iraq, in Syria, and Afghanistan? Absolutely. But again, I don't think that was the main problem. No, I think it was more just a convenient, excuse to do what they wanted. The Islam question is just interesting, because you have all of these tensions among religious groups and different sects of Islam, and then you add us into the mix and how we're interacting with them. And, it's just so, I don't know. I mean, it's not something that you wouldn't have people coming up to them and saying, I'm a such and such type of Muslim and I don't like you because, or what, like that didn't really happen so much as just, we don't want you here, leave.
It's very interesting. As you encountered these various groups, especially the Kurds and the Turks and the Syrians and maybe even Afghanistan, what did you pick up from them about their attitude or feelings about Israel?
Israel has always been a sticking point and an issue, at least since they became a nation again. Even what happened on October 7th, right, that was justified by what was going on the Temple Mount. And that's an oversimplification, but essentially it was called...
That was their excuse. It was called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, yeah.
Right. So that was their excuse.
I had the opportunity to go to Kurdistan in Iraq in 2018, and I was there for a month, mainly just to learn about the situation and explore. And I had some very, very interesting conversations with a number of high-level Kurdish officials in Iraq. And I found it fascinating that Kurds are Muslims. But unlike Islam in Turkey, Islam in Syria, Islam in southern Iraq, Iraq proper, and certainly in Iran and other places, the Kurds they love Israel.
Mm.
There's a real identification with Israel. And I remember asking this person with whom I spoke, I said, why? I mean, what is it that makes the Kurdish people and the Israeli people so warm toward one another? And he said something I thought was very interesting. He said, when you're a Kurd, your primary identity is not Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Your primary identity is that you're Kurdish.
Right.
And so if you approach me and you respect and care for me and want to help me as a Kurd, I'm your friend. Even today, the Kurds are Israel's, I think, closest allies in the Middle East.
If you are not yet a subscriber to endtimes.com and would like to see the rest of this important report and others like it, I urge you to subscribe right now at the website endtimes.com. For only $7 a month, you will receive a wealth of information and insight from Jimmy Evans, Mark Hitchcock, and experts from around the world, including Israelis living right here in the Jewish state. Do yourself a favor, sign up today. Then join me as we consider lessons learned on the ground in Syria by Tipping Point subscriber Stefan Byrne.